Maybe Interactive Stories is shutting down on the 25th of February. Most likely, this means nothing to you. And that's because this game crashed and burned into Whoville, or Nugudam if you're a Koreaboo. I'm here to talk about the downfall of Maybe Interactive and what went wrong in my opinion. I actually have another speedpaint with commentary coming up, but it's a much longer video and I am procrastinating. Maybe was released in 2019 for iOS and Android in Korea, receiving an English language release the following year. I think I was about 17 when I first got the game because my sister was super invested in Remarried Empress, and I found out there was a game where you could play through the story. I'd been a big fan of otome games for a while at this point, so I was pretty excited to try this out. Maybe Interactive follows the choose-your-own-adventure format of apps like Chapters or Episode, with a large selection of interactive stories that focus on romantic roots. My personal favorite is the most viewed story on the app, Royal Blood. The story was more or less a Twilight ripoff, with the MC being like a chosen one character with hidden power and affections that the three vampire brothers and one werewolf fight over. It also had vaguely ancestral undertones. Okay, I am not selling here. But basically our secret vampire deadbeat dad comes back for us and he's like, "You have really strong powers. We have to protect you. You should marry one of my 3 sons." And they're all like men from different eras that the vampire dad turned into a vampire, so he's essentially their non-biological vampire father. It's really weird, so I wrote it out on my insert lore. That aside, I really enjoyed the story for its charming characters, with each brother representing their own cute little archetype, as well as the gorgeous illustrations. Look up Royal Blood Maybe and you'll see just how pretty the art is. Euro and come back, I miss you. Maybe's appeal to me was in the cute anime and manhwa style that a lot of the stories had. There were different artists between stories, but you could still very much tell that it was a Korean game, with how the art looked in releases like The Tyrant's Bodyguard, Remarried Empress, A Good Day to Be a Dog. Yeah, that's right, if that sounded familiar. Maybe adapted stories from well-known naver novels or webtoons, which was another unique feature that made it interesting. Have you ever wanted to be in the shoes of the MC of your favorite webtoon? With this game, you had this power. My sister and I used that power to romance Sovyashu so that we could break his heart, but I never actually got far enough into the game to do that, so... Its webtoon-inspired art styles and brand recognition from Naver readers gave Maybe an advantage against huge competitors like Episode, which has a much more Western cartoon style. And frankly, Episode isn't known for its art style. And sure, Royal Blood's storyline was pretty plain, but there were so many stories which probably had more nuanced plot. I think Remarried Empress was a pretty complex story, as the source material is, and The Tyrant's Bodyguard had some really cool action that was fun to read alongside the romance elements. I don't remember most of the others though, because I played a lot of filler stories to get free diamonds for the stories that I actually liked. The filler stories for me would be whatever was on the free ticket rotation and looked unappealing. AKA the, excuse my language, smut-centric stories with these semi-realistic sprite styles that just looked so uncanny. Honestly, it looked worse in animation. There was slightly less movement in the Royal Blood sprites, but the semi-realistic faces just moved too much, I fear. I think this was one of Maybe's first fumbles. It is worth noting that this new semi-realistic style became characteristic of most of Maybe's late releases in the English version. I also noticed a shift in the stories. I think that the more explicit stories often came with a realistic style. Notably, a BL webtoon called Walk on Water was adapted into Maybe, but it was adapted in this semi-realistic art style, which I would attribute to its explicit content. At first, this style and genre had its own category, like its own little corner, but eventually, all the new stories being released in the English app were of this genre. I picked this game back up a year or 2 after I initially started, and I was surprised at the lack of updates. But most of the more recent additions appeared to be in the semi-realistic style, which honestly just discouraged me from playing them, even if I was interested in the stories. Like, The Sweetest Thing is not the ugliest art-wise, but I think I would have eaten it up if it was in a cuter art style. That might just be my personal opinion, to be fair. I have nothing against people who like this era of Maybe or enjoy these stories, but I do think that it played a factor in alienating their audience, a lot of which chose to play it because it offered a collection of choose-your-own-adventure stories with an Asian media-leaning art style, something that set it apart from its other competitors. Honestly, I think the English app developers felt that they needed to appease the existing players of these games by trying to emulate its competitors. Notably, there weren't nearly as many semi-realistic styles featured on the Korean app, which I installed out of curiosity to compare the two. I actually went on the home screen for both versions of the app, and you can see that the Korean one just not only does it feel more organized, but there's proportionately more of the webtoon kind of style, whereas on the Western one, there's 2 categories, and honestly, I think they were trying to hide most of their stories. A huge chunk of them were in this semi-realistic pocketbook looking style. I felt frustrated and cheated when I noticed all these titles that never actually got localized for the English app, which favored promoting strange titles like Loving the Mountain Man. What is this? I really think it tried to be episode and failed miserably. This desire to be like episode really became too obvious when maybe added the feature for users to create their own stories, which was too little too late, as people were barely playing at this point. Also, the different sprites' art styles were so jarring that it looked unusual putting most sprites together. I would know. This was ultimately a poor move because if you already liked episode, you would just play episode, which has a bigger fanbase and a larger selection of stories. Episode stories have also become more notorious for the camp factor and somewhat ridiculous situations that the players find themselves in. Especially before the users' stories were introduced, maybe never had this level of unseriousness attached to it. The Western branch really shot themselves in the foot by trying to appease an audience already captured by the competitor, instead of working to maintain what differentiated them. I don't know of any significant apps in this format that currently fill this niche, which is unfortunate because that's what drew me to the app in the first place. Even still, the true killer of Maybe Interactive that solidified its doom is yet to be mentioned. Like most free-to-play mobile apps these days, Maybe came with microtransactions, using a premium diamond currency like episode and choices. While the stories are technically free-to-play, to get certain choices and scenes, you need a certain amount of diamonds to proceed. Usually these apps will give you an incentive to spend the diamonds by showing the character's disappointment or a humiliating situation that occurs when you pick the free option. It wasn't that bad in Maybe, actually. In Royal Blood, I remember the characters just expressed slight disappointment if you chose not to do something. Although I did feel really bad when Sophia would prepare an outfit for me and I'm like, no. But essentially, you could just save up for your diamonds and use them for that one love interest that you really wanted to get the good ending for. But Episode was known for their ridiculous gem baiting schemes. You've probably seen the memes. Pee in a cup, divorce. Pretty much if you don't use your gems, you're doomed to get the bad endings. And it's funny because it's so unserious, but maybe didn't have that level of unseriousness, so they weren't gonna get exposure from people dogging on comically obvious cash grabs. Curtis Connor would not have made videos playing any of these. Except maybe Loving the Mountain Man. I understand that premium currencies are important for companies to make money from their free games, but Maybe Interactive decided to do the most obnoxious cash grabbing move that it could. Around December 2022, when I reinstalled Maybe Interactive, I found that the diamonds now expired after a day or two. I didn't bother finding out how long they technically lasted, but I remember my hard-earned diamonds disappeared before I even got the chance to use them, and I was very frustrated. I wasn't the type to earn gems and immediately use them. I'm used to hoarding premium currency, but here I didn't have a choice. The only diamonds that didn't expire were the ones that you'd purchase. Some stories would have multi-chapter arcs with one love interest. I could no longer save my diamonds for my preferred route, lest I lose them, or like, play the whole thing. This feature did not sit well with majority of the player base, with many sharing their sentiments on the Maybe Interactive subreddit, which used to be a discussion place for new chapters and plot speculations. But now, it was filled with complaints about event diamonds expiring, and then eventually, hey, are they even releasing new content anymore? Being around at the community's peak activity and then just seeing the barren wasteland with very few players left was just kind of sad. I don't remember if there was an official boycott when this happened, but I know many fans deleted the game out of frustration, and even more over time as they stopped releasing new stories. Gone was the thrill of every chapter release and discussion, and the oldest stories had little replay value because you had to dedicate so much time to earning and immediately using your diamonds. I think that's such a blatant display of greed as a downfall of a lot of apps, and Maybe unfortunately fell victim to this. Like, I understand if they probably wanted to give more incentive for people to buy their premium currency, but they ignore the value that free-to-play players brought to the table. We watched ads tediously for those crumbs of diamonds, which got them money through ad impressions. We'd increase our playtime by playing stories to get gems to spend on our favorites. People played so much of this game to hoard thousands of free gems. Honestly, I think they forgot that having players alone at last year games would grow its audience. If Maybe kept releasing stories and allowed people to work for diamonds that didn't disappear, I don't doubt they would have at least kept the bigger audience that they once had. After this move, Maybe was only really left with people who were still somehow willing to pay for the experience, although the number of paying players most likely decreased, because honestly, I would never pay to play the soulless stories with ugly art styles that the English app were releasing for the latter part of its life, like ew. With no new stories out, they'd run out of places to spend their diamonds, so why buy them? When you alienate your entire free-to-play player base, you're really only left with those people who are paying. And then when they lose interest, what do you have now? With no one backing the app financially, they're finally shutting it down. In my opinion, this extremely powerful greed is common for the downfall of mobile apps. I don't think premium currencies will ever go away, But I just wish developers wouldn't make games unplayable for free-to-play players. At that point, just make it a paid game to begin with, so then people buying them will actually get their money's worth. This is why I'm a fan of Animal Crossing Pocket Camp Complete, which brought a solution to its players' frustrations at its predecessor, which was free but heavily impacted by many purchasable features. I do think that there will always be people with disposable incomes who could fund games, allowing them to remain free for other players. If profit becomes an issue, I think it's better to put the entire game behind the paywall rather than punishing players who can't afford it. I think we should give people incentive to make purchases by giving enhanced experiences, instead of taking away from the general player base's experiences. It's just quite sad to see because I really did enjoy some of the earlier stories. It's kind of weird to think of the fact that the Royal Blood Brothers will be archival, that Remarried Empress can no longer be played as a game. Both the Korean and English apps are shutting down. I installed the Korean app just to check if this was the case. It's unfortunate that the English app turned so bad, because it was trying to cater to what they thought the Western audience would want. But I believe that most of the Western players, or at least a significant chunk of them, wanted to experience a webtoon version of Episode with arguably prettier art. That's what it was providing at first. And that's what the Korean app seemed to maintain. But then they decided that the move was to try and be Episode. And then they took away the free-to-play diamonds, basically making it unplayable. It's really unfortunate. I had a fun time playing this game, and I hope that the maybe interactive players, or what little is left of us, would find a new alternative app soon. I'm looking forward to seeing another app with this kind of style, because the Episode and choice art styles just aren't for everyone. I know it's not personally for me, but it has its audience. With the end of maybe interactive, there's a newly opened niche to fill. And I hope that whoever attempts it next won't make the same mistakes. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching.